My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn. Also with me is Tanya Finchum. Today is August the 5th, 2014, and we're in Guymon, Oklahoma at the Hitch Ranch interviewing Chris Hitch and Rick Furnish as part of the Oklahoma Centennial Farm Families Oral History Project. Thank you guys for joining us today.
Yeah.
Let's learn a little bit more about how the Hitch family came to this part of Oklahoma. Can you start us off, Chris?
Yeah, I think I remember it. Rick, correct me if I'm making a mistake. The family was originally from Tennessee, and not long after the Civil War, I guess things were pretty hard to get work or get anything done. My great-great-grandfather left his family and went out to Missouri, I think it was Springfield, to catch on with the guy that was out there. I believe Westmoreland was his name, that had a dry goods store, and they were running cattle out into the plains and then bringing them back and selling. I'm not quite sure when he left, exact year, and the current guess is 1884. But the question I'm not clear on is, originally they settled up just north of the Oklahoma-Kansas line in Kansas, and shortly thereafter they moved out here. We always say 1884, but it's never been clear to me whether we settled in Kansas or if we settled here at 1884. But my great-great-grandfather settled here, began the ranch, and eventually brought his wife, and by then he had a wife and I think even a child that was born in Missouri before they were brought here. And
Della was born in
Della.
She was born in Missouri, and then he moved to, actually they moved up around in Barber County by Medicine Lodge, and then they stayed there, and then they come to down by Liverpool on the Dry Cimarron, and then they moved on down here. And they come here in 1884.
Okay, they came to Guymon. Okay, I just didn't know whether
to the Oklahoma Panhandle in 1884.
We still have some of the property in Kansas where they homesteaded there. But this is now the main part of the country. We sold all of our Hitch Enterprises personal land up there, but we still have some family trust stuff that's up there that's part of the original homestead from way back then.
So why this part of Oklahoma?
I don't know the exact differences in the law back then. Kansas was more developed. This was still no man's land. It wasn't part of the state. The southern border of Oklahoma, the Panhandle, is the top of the slave area. So Texas was a slave state, so they didn't want the Panhandle. I think Kansas was already semi-established as far as a territory, so that just left this little strip of no man's land. And my assumption is that there was less rules regarding homesteading, and he started in Kansas and then migrated down here because you could probably have more land. Is that pretty close to right?
Right, and there was nobody here. There's free range.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could come here and take it and hold it, not necessarily take it, but just establish your place here, you could run your cattle here, and the rule was you could run cattle from halfway to the next water. So if you're on the cold water, you could run cattle halfway to the Beaver River, which is up here, and you could run cattle halfway to the Paladura Creek, that's down here, legally. And there was no fences, there was no nothing. I mean, so all you had to do is come here and take care and stay with them.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wanted to stay with them. There was no people. Only Indians, vagrants and outlaws, because there was no law.
Mm-hmm. So those early years, it was mostly a cattle operation?
Yeah, that's all it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really pretty migratory.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we didn't have semis, interstates, and highways, stuff to move the cattle back and forth. So you literally pushed them. If they needed meat in Chicago, there was one pretty good way to get there. pushed them some to a railhead. And then at the railhead, they got on a train and left. I don't know when Guymon's was officially established, but originally they started out, in Springfield and would push cattle out here, graze them during the summer, and then push them all the way back. And I don't know if they went to Dodge City or if they went to Kansas City on those original years, but that's what they did. Now, eventually, the rail was in Liberal, then they got closer, then they got, built 20 miles a year or something like that, or 15 miles a year, and so it gets slightly closer. And Liberal's about 40 miles north of here. Okay. And so, Dodge City, obviously, very well-known place. It's about 2 hours from here. So they kind of migrated, the railroad migrated closer to the cattle, if you will. And they had the cattle where there was grass.
Steamers could only go 10 miles without water. They run out of water. They could carry coal, but they couldn't carry but enough water to build steam to run for 10 miles. So if you watch the towns and through here, they're basically on 10-mile increments. Liberal and then Tyrone is 10 miles. 10 miles from there is Hooker. 10 miles from there is Optima. 10 miles from there is Guymon. 10 miles is Goodwill. 10 miles is Texoma. All down the railroad. So that's the reason that they kind of went, the towns kind of established where the train stops.
Well, when they opened up this part of the country for settlement, the Hitch family officially gained ownership of the land.
Yeah, well, they had to
relinquish a lot of it.
They had
a lot of it that they had used. Well, if somebody come in and homesteaded it, well, you had to give it up because they had to. What is the Organic Act?
I think that's what it is. There was a set of rules that defined how much property you could have.
Right.
And I think like everybody else out here, our cousins lived down there and our uncle lived down here. So you'd have 3 or 4 or 5 homesteads that they were all ours. Our cousins might still live in Springfield, Missouri. But, you wanted as much land as you could get. So, and really, this whole river, for several miles down further, to several miles back to the east, was all family land. I mean, brothers and cousins and stuff, all settled in this little valley. In fact, our neighbors were the Millers, and they were our neighbors for over 100 years. Finally, the last gentleman working the land down there died in 98 or something like that, 97, and all that property changed. It might have been done earlier than that. All that property finally changed. But the families have been sitting next together for over 100 years.
We had a 100-year celebration in '84, and in '88, I went to theirs. So they had been neighbors for 100 years. That's a long time. And then they was one of the only ones that wasn't family. It was the Millers. If you could establish your homesteads by the water source, and there was no water, so you either had to dig a well, which back then you probably could have hit water at 50 or 60 feet. Well, that's pretty hard to dig by hand in the homesteaders. So everybody wanted to be by the river. So if you could get the quarters by the river, well, you could pretty well.
You got it.
Yeah, you could pretty well dominate. Yeah. Like here, there was they homesteaded right here where this house was originally.
That house, not that one, the one before it, burned down in 1994. And that was, it had been added, modified, and changed, obviously, over the years, but it was the original place. So that's where the house was built. And there's several pictures in the Centennial Farm Families and stuff like that. The progression that it went through. Yeah, the dining room walls were about 24 to 30 inches thick. It was all dirt. If you got all the stuff off of the wall, it's just mud.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little more about the original house. What do you remember?
I don't remember a lot about it. I mean, I remember the way it was after Mom and Dad redid it. But they redid it when I was in first grade or something like that. And that house had been redone by my grandfather, I think.
Yeah, they redid it in 48 or 49 after my dad came here. And they went in and added on to it. And they had it was a voting precinct for this area. They had an office off of the east side of the house, and it was basically the voting precinct. So when the election came, everybody came here in this precinct to vote. And a Republican would come out and a Democrat would come out. They both set up in the office, and that's where everybody voted. So you didn't have to go anywhere to vote. You just go in the office here and vote. And but they had.
That's why I asked him to be here. He knows these little facts that I.
They had a basement, and the basement of that house was the original dugout of and it, of course, they had cemented the walls, but not all the way to the top. There was a crawl space underneath it. And then in '48, they went in and they dug back into the walls as far as they could, and removed a lot of the dirt and put mortar. And then they added on some stuff to the house at that time. And then Henry and Christine lived in it. So Henry died in '67, I think.
Where I was born.
And then after that, Christine moved over in with Lad, and Paul and Linda moved into this house. And then
That's my mother and father.
And then they remodeled it in early 90s. No, 79.
No, it was
79 when they remodeled it.
Yeah, I was first.
And they tore the office off part of it, and they remodeled up above it, and they made it a lot more livable. But it was a nice house. Mm-hmm. But you could go out in the new house and see the exterior walls of the old house. So it's like a double rock wall. They had rock walls on the outside and rock walls on the inside. Mm-hmm. So actually, when the house caught on fire, there was virtually no way to put it out. Not because you couldn't assault the fire from the exterior, because the fire was 2 rock walls inside. The only way that they ever got water on the house and stopped the burning was when a roof burned off. It was a big fire. We burned the tops of these trees, caught them on fire. This house here the roof was smoking. They had water running on the roof of this one, trying to keep it from catching. It was hot. Hot fire.
I was at OSU.
Well, during James K. Hitch's time, was it all cattle, or did he diversify into other areas?
Obviously, at the time, we were predominantly cattle. Mm-hmm. Especially the beginning years of the ranch irrigation. Obviously, we didn't have internal combustion engines. We didn't have, the gas wasn't developed, so it took some time. I believe the irrigation became popular in the 50s, didn't it?
Yeah, late 40s,
early 50s. And there's some pictures. I have some someplace of our first tailwater pit with the water going into it, and everybody's kind of standing by holding hands and really proud of it.
And that was a big deal for this time.
It was a big deal for the area.
Mm-hmm.
It changed the area. We have the Ogallala Aquifer underneath the area, underneath all of this land. And, we live in, it's not quite desert, but it's dang sure semi-arid. Mm-hmm. And so there was plenty of water. The ground's very fertile. We have a lot of days of sun. Sometimes we have a little too much sun. But whenever they developed irrigation and were able to start irrigating crops, this area was able to develop 2 main things that completely changed the area. Oh, and one of the other things is we have a lot of natural gas in the ground. So we don't have to go very far to get power to an irrigation motor. We have gas that we can tap, bring it over to the irrigation motor, and run it off that. So, but when you pump that water, you could grow corn and other grains, which means that your cow-calf production usually can't compete with straight row crop. And the other thing it allowed the development of the feeding industry in this area. Previous to that, the feeding industry was in two main places. And the first place it really developed was out in California and Arizona. The second place that it developed was up in Iowa and that area. Corn Belt, yeah. And so they have nasty winters, and they have, well, they didn't have to have irrigation to their corn. That's where it developed. When we have a much better climate, really, overall, to raise cattle on concentrate than they do. So over time, the cattle industry grew in Nebraska, Ogallala Aquifer, Kansas, Ogallala Aquifer, Oklahoma, Ogallala Aquifer, Texas. I mean, you can kind of see a pattern in these central plains here, primarily where the cattle were. The grass out here, it's harder country to raise cattle on. So you can have a cow-calf pair down in Florida or the southern states where they grow a tremendous amount of grass. Those guys are able to have the cow-calf pairs in smaller geographic areas. It's just the carrying capacity of land is a lot higher. Out here, feedlots kind of smell, a lot of dust. Well, you build them where there's not people. There's no one to complain about them. And they just migrated to here. And in fact, all the packing capacity was here over time. Started out in Kansas City, Chicago, and then it slowly migrated as the cattle moved. It migrated here. And that's really, when you really get down to it, before we were just a traditional ranch. We had planted some orchards down here because this was all naturally sub-irrigated from the water that was available from the river. You could grow a lot of trees and stuff down here as it dried out, went from irrigation and over irrigating. All this bottom ground is not near as wet as it once was, but they kind of had developed it a little bit, but they couldn't do anything with water. You couldn't move it. But once that came about, luckily my grandfather was a pretty good visionary, and he fed cattle once or twice out in Arizona and lost a lot of money out there. He said, I can do that here. I don't really have to go to Arizona to lose money. So we built the feedlot literally on top of the hill here. My grandfather, or great-grandfather, didn't like the idea. He didn't like confined feeding operations. He didn't like, cattle are supposed to roam free. And so he kind of picked out a pretty nasty piece of ground to build the feedlot on, which turns out
actually was good.
Yeah, it was really good. Because the ground is really hard. It's got a lot of caliche in the ground. Not much growing there. Yeah, whenever it rains, the water washes off. You don't get muddy conditions like you would otherwise if you were on just plain dirt. The other thing is because there's caliche and that there's a lot of slope to the land there, the water does leave the pens. It doesn't sit. It turned out to be just right. But those are the two main things, and they all happened simultaneously. In the late 40s, irrigation developed, and then in the 50s, and I think 52 or 54 is when we built our first small feed yard up on top of the hill, 5,000 head capacity.
Henry's the one that started farming.
Yeah.
He's the one, he started farming. Matter of fact, in 1930, he was Oklahoma's largest wheat producer. Anywhere in the state of Oklahoma.
How did the Dust Bowl impact him? Because that had to be...
It broke him, basically. He was broke, and he couldn't pay his bills, but the people that was here believed in him, so they stuck with him, and he paid them back. He was basically broke. Everybody else was broke too. He had financed, the way I understood it, a lot of land through an insurance company. And the insurance company, basically, he wanted to give it to him. He said, I can't make it. And they said, well, if you can't make it, we know we can't make it. So we'll just come out here and live with you. So they did. They actually lived in the house with him, Christine, for, I don't know, they said close to 2 years. And helped him with his finances and record keeping and all that. And then things picked up, and he had told me once that oil and gas saved him and probably most of the ranchers too. But that's when they started leasing the oil and gas. And he said, they didn't lease for very much money, but a lot of money then when nobody had any. So he said, they come in here in Phillips 66, they leased every section. And in order to hold it, they come in and drill a gas well in the center of every section. So all these gas wells that you see around here, those little meter houses, they're right in the middle of the section. So they can, as long as they produce that, they can hold all 4 quarters and nobody else can lease it. But, he started farming in the 30s. And then Lad started the feedlots, and then Paul's dad, he got into the pig production. And so each one of them kind of started their own deal. I don't know what Chris and Jason's going to start, but never say never. No, don't know.
Yeah, well, chicken farming is probably not likely to move out here anytime soon, so I don't imagine we'll get the chickens running around.
I had a lot of people ask me, how come they don't raise chickens out here? I said, they don't have anywhere to kill them. They build a plan, I guarantee you there'll be some people start raising them.
Henry C. had one child.
He had 3.
He had 3 children. And what were their names? We have
Lad, which would be Henry C. Hitch Jr.,
right,
my grandfather. Joyce, which would be Josh's grandmother.
Middle daughter.
Yeah, middle daughter. I'm sorry, Lad was the baby. And then we had Marjorie. And Marjorie. Yeah, not Margie, Marjorie. I think she died maybe before I was born.
She married a Price.
Price, yeah. She's down in Florida. And I don't know how much property is still jointly owned in the family. I think there's a little bit here and there, but they had some orchards and lots of other business dealings down there. But like I said, that's really, I stayed here in the Panhandle. I didn't go down there a whole lot. I've been down to the house. They had a house. It's a really pretty house down there on the lake, and I've been to that. But that's the limit of my knowledge. So,
W.K. Price, the guy that married Marjorie, had a friend down there, and he had been in the citrus business. And so I guess Lad and Henry had went down there to visit them, and anyway, they got to going around, and so they decided that they wanted to venture into the citrus business, and they did. They owned, I don't know how many acres of orange, and they owned those for quite some time. And Lad had always told us once, he said, that's the worst thing that you can own. He said, it's way worse than cattle because orange tree, from the time you plant it till it's in full production, it's almost like 7 years. So he said, you talk about having an investment. And what happened is they got one of those bad freezes down there and killed a bunch of the trees. And Lad said it wasn't near as much fun after that. So, but everything worked out because there was some guys in the citrus business that had a lot of idle land, and they could run like 2 cows per acre down in that country around those groves. So a lot of them raised a lot of cattle. So he'd visit with them. They'd send their cattle up here and feed them. And he had one customer that down there that said he'd feed like 15 to 20,000 head a year through the organization.
Just to give you an idea, on an average year out here, it's about 15 to 25 acres per cow. Whereas there's 2 to an acre. So the density, that's what I was getting with the cow-calf business. I mean, you can raise so many more cattle in a small period, small little plot of ground. It's kind of hard to compete.
Well, with Henry Sr., tell me about his wife.
Christine? She was from a broken family. Her mother and dad had divorced. And she was terribly against divorce, which, I understand that. But anyway, she had lived with her mother, and her mother went up there and filed on a claim up by Woods, Kansas, which is about 5 or 6 miles from the Hitch headquarters in Kent. And
when you say filed on a claim,
yeah, they had 160 acres.
Yeah,
and they lived out there. Her and her mother and I think a sister. And anyway, they was living there. Well, she was teaching school at the Hidden Valley, Pleasant Valley School. And she would walk over to school and teach, and then she'd walk home. It was just like a half or 3/4 of a mile from her. Well, her and Henry had met at some church functions in Liberal, and they had met. So dating, and Henry would go overseas. And then in the meantime, Henry was running that ranch up there in Kansas. And his dad moved him back down here. And his dad moved to Liberal and built a house in Liberal. They had a house in Liberal. JK had a house in Liberal. He had this one, and he had one in Guymon. Of course, everybody thinks that's kind of unusual, but the only way to travel was by horse and buggy. So if you went somewhere, you wanted to have a place to stay. So they would have a house. Not a real big one, but a house. And anyway, he come back down here. Well, then they got to dating still, and he married Christine up there. Her name was Walker, Christine Walker.
Yeah, she was still alive when I was a little kid. And basically, the only thing I remember, I was fascinated. She had dentures, and she could take her teeth out. And I don't know what was so fascinating about it, but it was amazing to me. And she would take them out once and then put them back in. And, oh, you got to do it again. But she wouldn't. But that's pretty much it. She could have to take her teeth out.
Always a teacher. She loved to teach, and so all of the kids would be around here. I had a brother and sister, and then there was a Mexican fellow here that he had 2 boys and a daughter. The ranch general manager, he had 2 daughters and a son that was my age, and then they had there was another family here, and they had one of their grandsons was living with them. And then there was another family here that had 2 girls. Well, we'd all be out playing and fussing and fighting. Well, she'd go out there and say, well, you all are either going to have to go home if you can't get along, or come in the house and I'll read to you. So we'd go in and she'd read for hours. Just read all kinds of books, nursery rhymes, or, Huckleberry Finn. She was a nice lady, very nice lady. So it was kind of like, she was mentoring us all the time.
And one of the things you'll see, especially out here, I remember it, but I was pretty young whenever the population at the ranch really started shrinking. He's going to walk off, Josh, don't worry about it. And, years ago, technology was horribly expensive and difficult to get a hold of, and horribly unreliable, and everything you can think of. But people were cheap. You could hire them by the dozens, and it took dozens because the best tool you had was a shovel, or a pickaxe, or something like that. So when I was even a little kid, gosh, there had to be 17 or 20 workers out here at the ranch. And now, granted, we had a lot of irrigation down here on this river bottom.
Put up a lot of hay.
And it took a lot of hands to keep that stuff running and going. Now we have very little irrigation down here on the river. We do have some, but the stuff that we've got now is so reliable. A few guys can take care of thousands of acres.
And we run more cattle.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't have a lot of crops down here at all.
Before, in 1974, this feedlot went commercial, where they fed cattle for other people. Prior to that, all of the cattle in that feedlot belonged to Hitch, or the Hitch family. I mean, Henry, Christine had cattle. She always fed cattle. Lad fed cattle. Chris's dad fed cattle. I'm sure your granddad, grandmother, they always fed cattle. Everybody fed cattle. So all of the cattle there belonged, but the cattle would all come into here. And we would get, in a year's time, 50 to 60,000 head of cattle would unload here. And we would process them all. Some of the bigger cattle we would take straight to the kilo. The littler ones we would turn out and sort them up, and then when they got bigger, we'd take them, get them into bunches. But we was just kind of basically a big clearinghouse. They'd buy cattle from all over, and they'd all come here, and then we would co-mix them, co-mingle them, and then they'd go to kilos. Steers, heifers, bulls, Holsteins, in and out. And when they stopped the open range in Oklahoma, which would have been in the early 60s, down in the southeastern corner of the state, where there's a lot of people that own 100 head of cows, had no land. They just go buy a calf or something at the sale barn, take it out there and put their brand on, dump it out. And go out there and brand their calves. Every once in a while they go gather some of them. Well, then they said, no, this is no longer a fact, so we can't do that. So I think a lot of those big clearing houses, they bought a lot of that country for stuff. Who owns a lot of that stuff down there?
You know what?
There was a big paper company.
Yeah,
a
there's
lot
a
of
paper mill in southeast Oklahoma.
They didn't care nothing about running
Five
cattle or
acres.
nothing. They just had, so people would run cattle on them. And but anyway, Henry told our cattle buyer then, he said, Luke, he said, you go out and buy everything you can buy for a $100 bill. Which doesn't sound like much today, but that's, you know, a 4-weight heifer would cost you 17 cents or 20 cents, you know. So they sent a lot of cattle in here. I mean, little inbred, sorry cattle that people didn't take care of. But they cleaned a lot of them up that way, quick.
At least you're able to draw awareness to what happened.
Yeah.
And I think that was.
I mean, people, I think, you know, even growing up, the only, go ahead, I'll let you get started. Growing up, the only people, I mean, my grandfather was around, but he was bitter about it. Joyce was around. She wouldn't talk about it. So you kind of, it was hard to find anything out about the Dust Bowl, really, about this area. I mean, anytime that you were being a little too spoiled around my grandfather, you know, I remember when I was growing, you know, that sort of, it broke into one of those deals. You didn't really learn anything. You just kind of felt beat down.
Mm-hmm.
And Joyce just really, she wouldn't even talk about it. It was terrible. They would used to take irons and iron all the centipedes out of the wall. I mean, you know, that's just insane to me.
Mm-hmm.
But that whole time, you know, that's a great example. This is something that we still fight today, is that the Dust Bowl. You had a period there that obviously got extremely dry. And people were breaking ground out to farm, dryland farming, so you couldn't, I mean, once you got rid of the vegetation, nothing there to hold the ground. And then there was probably some overgrazing that occurred at the same time. Less probably their fault, because they had, you know, been used to a certain amount of rainfall and expecting it, and they have a certain amount of cattle, and then all of a sudden they don't have them. You know, they don't have the rain, so the cattle tromp everything into the ground. Right on the heels of that, we have in the 50s irrigation and the feedlot development. So you had the Dust Bowl, which was horribly bad on the diversity of grasses and the quality of grass and fauna that you had out here for the cattle to feed on. Right after that, you had 60,000 head of cattle arriving a year to the feedlot. Well, they come to the ranch first, they chomp around out here, and then go to the feed yard. Well, what do you do there? You overgraze the ground. Well, you know, it's real evident. You can go back and see pictures of the ranch, and there was no yucca and sage and cactus here at all. It was just grass. There was a little bit here and there, but you can see in the pictures, it's all just grass. And now, you know, there are places where it's 95% invasive species, woody, cactus, yucca, you know, just brush. And all that came after the drought and the subsequent boom in our cattle numbers past this region. And really, except for just a couple of pastures, a lot of our property's in a lot better shape than our neighbors. But you know, the story was told, and I don't know if it's true or not, but you know, Cotton gets some cattle in, he says, Lad, when do you want me to take these to the feedlot? And Lad said, when there's nothing left out there but tracks. You know, that was kind of the prevailing mentality. Well, modern, you know, ranching and taking care of your grass, that didn't exist. So now we've been spending years, and it's a horribly expensive process of trying to spray and knock back some of that stuff, let the grass get seeded back in. Then we have a summer like we had, you know, 3 years ago, where everything that you've done right for the last 10 years is just washed away in one summer because it gets so hot, so dry, that the only thing that grows is or that's left is weed seed at the end of it. It's been a pretty tough transition, but we can't, even from the 80s to now, the quality of the grasses and the carrying capacity of the ranch has increased significantly. Part of that is just straight rainfall. The 80s were some of the wettest years, period. They were great. 70s and 80s were wet, and now it's drier. But part of it
has been the driest 3 years in recorded history.
But
that's drier than the dust.
The quality of the grass is growing just isn't there. There's not much of it. There's weeds and invasive species in it, so it's been pretty tough out here for a while.
A good example of it is J.K. and Charlie in the early 1900s. Between their Texas deal and here, one of them owned 5,000 cows. And the other one owned 2. So that's 7,000 head of cows. You didn't market anything but 2 to 3, 4-year-old steers. So you had to keep 7,000 cows. You'd have to have a bull for at least every 30 cows. And then you'd have to have horses and everything for that. Then you'd have to have the calves on the cows, which would be around 5,000. You'd have the 5,000 yearlings that you couldn't sell for 2 or 3 years. You'd have the 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, and 4-year-olds all here. So there had to be a lot more grass.
Yeah, I mean, just simply put, there was more grass.
Yeah, I mean, the cattle, what happened is the cattle changed the whole ecosystem. I mean, they ate out all the big grass. Like in these meadows, they said that the grass would purify the horse. It was all sub-irrigated, and that was one of the things that kept J.K. in business when a lot of other people. They had a real bad blizzard here in 1886.
18, how do you say 18?
And he had put up some hay. A lot of other guys had all their cattle carried. And he could sustain his cows. You know, it might not make them as good as they should have been, but he could at least keep them alive. And from then on, well, they always put up hay. I don't know a year, I don't ever remember a year that somebody here didn't bale some hay of some kind. Forever. And I'm 63. I don't really remember every year, but there's always some hay in production here. A lot of the times the older guys, they didn't have a lot of free time. Their free time was trying to figure out how they was going to survive for the next 8 months. They worked hard, and they didn't go anywhere, but they really, they was either collecting stuff, they was more or less herders and gatherers. They was trying to gather up stuff to survive for themselves, and they was canning, or they planted the orchard. They grew gardens. They tried to grow watermelon here, and pumpkins, and muskmelon, cantaloupe. They raised some of them on us here before I was old enough to remember. They had some. They tried to raise some other crops, and a lot of it really wasn't for fruit. A lot of it, what I'd heard, that they raised some watermelons over around Liberal, Kansas, and they raised them for seed crops, to sell seed to other people. I didn't know that. I figured they just raised watermelons for watermelons to eat. They raised them for seed.
Can't afford to eat them.
I probably ate all they wanted.
Yeah.
But they all get right at the same time. So.
Yeah. You don't exactly have a long window there.
But they raised, at different times, they raised alfalfa here. They raised seed crop alfalfa. We had a seed cleaner and everything here. Sold certified seed. Back in the early 50s, if you had 100 to 150 or 200 head of registered Hereford business was good. And you could make a pretty good living on that many cows. You can't even know it. They had a registered herd here, and they had a commercial herd. And then at the same time, they had registered horses here, and they had a commercial herd. they got out of the cow business in, it would have been the early 50s, about when they got the feedlot business too. And they stayed in that business for, until the 60s, and they got back into cow business around 68. They stayed in the cow business for a couple of years. They was basically just speculation cows. And then they never got really serious. They'd always buy some cows or jump in and buy 150, 200 head of cows, have calves, wean the calves off, sell a cow. Just trying to, take advantage of the market of the season. But then in '86, well, the premium beef and all started coming out. So Paul and Lad had decided that they wanted to try to raise better gaining animals and better quality of meat. And so we started AIing, artificial inseminating cows, and they did quite a bit of that. And we did that for probably close to 10 years, off and on. And we raised some tremendous animals, but we were basically putting as much money in them as we would if we had registered animals. And we never started with registered animals, so you never could end up with registered animals. And the packers never would pay you. They give you the top of the market for a discount. Paul had always told me, he said, they don't have to pay you a premium. What they have to do is give you a discount. He said, it's never, we're going to pay you more than this animal's worth. No, we're going to discount you. It's always, you talk to the packers, it's everything's a discount. But, and then Chris and his granddad and dad was in the packing business. They owned 4 packing houses. They owned one in Hereford, one in Clovis, one in Booker, Texas, and where the other one was at? They had, I think they had 4.
I know
It was all small
the
packers.
the 3 you mentioned, I don't know where a 4th one was.
And they sold one to the kosher people. And then they sold one in Booker to a guy that was a maintenance guy that had worked in the plant at Garden City. So that's the last one that they got out of, was Booker. But, they was never a big contender in the packing business.
About the time they started exiting the packer business is when it became really aware the industry was consolidating, and they were starting to really realize economies of scale. And beef at the time, there was no good beef, bad beef. There was just beef, just meat. So it was all commodities. So the best they could do, the only way you could make more money is to each one you killed had to cost you incrementally a little bit less. Mm-hmm. So these guys that were only killing a couple hundred a day or something, boy, they're really inefficient compared to one of these plants down here kill 6,000 a day.
Volume.
Yeah, I mean, that's how you make your money. If you only can make $1, you better sell a lot of them.
Everybody talks bad about corporate farming, but that's the only way that farming can exist today. The little mom and pop farms are gone, and they'll never return. And when I was a kid, everybody around here was a little farmer. You had 3/4 of land, and you made a decent living. Now, you might have done a little outside work on different seasonal times, but not anymore. I mean, they've sold out to bigger people, or they leased out to somebody else. So it's just like the pig industry or the cattle industry. You have pigs, and you're farrow-to-finish, say 400,000 pigs a year. You make $10 a head profit and pay all your bills. Pretty good money. Mm-hmm. If you got 150 pigs and you make $10 a head, you'll go broke. So, it's just the big gets bigger and the little gets out. That's the name of the game, and the farming is the same way. I mean, in order to farm today with the cost of machinery, you have to be a big farm.
Boy, and
tractors are $200,000 to $300,000. A drill costs $160,000.
Yeah, they allow you to do more work with less people. Mm-hmm. So, like I said, this ranch had 20 people on it 30 years ago that would show up every morning and work all day long and then go home. And many of them lived here on the ranch. Well, you know,
my mom cooked for the bunkhouse people. And a lot of times she would feed 17 guys. And then back then they didn't have pickups. They had a guy in the morning. He would take everybody around and drop them off at a tractor. And then they'd have a service truck that would go fill it up with fuel. They didn't have radios or nothing. And then he would come back at noon and drop them off their lunch. And they would have a lunch box, and they would bring it in the evening, and somebody would prepare them a lunch for the next day. But you didn't leave the field until somebody came out there and picked you up at night. If you broke down, you just broke down. You just stayed there, and you was there from then. But sometimes at that point, Hitches had 17 tractors, and they would have 17 tractors running. Well, today they've got tractors that'll do as much work as those 17 tractors would. One tractor. Now it probably costs twice as much as all 17 of those. But, you know, they've got GPS on them where they drive themselves. And it's just amazing.
And it still only takes one person to run one tractor.
More efficient.
Yeah.
More efficient.
That's how it, and it, food.
But
food, I don't know what that was. Food is still relatively inexpensive. I think the United States pays 9 or 11%. I can't remember of the money that they make on food. I mean, that means that I don't know what you have to spend for shelter, but when you get right down to it, we have a lot of disposable income that's not spent on staying alive.
And the times are changing. I mean, I was telling somebody the other day, they said, how come you're a cowboy? I said, you know, really, I don't know that I had a choice. My dad kind of made the choice for me. I mean, I was born here, and when I got old enough that I could do work, well, they said, okay, well, you can get up, get your clothes on, come down here, you can catch a horse, and you can go with this Mexican fella and rope cattle all day, and we'll pay you. I said, well, Dad, everybody else is having fun, and they're in town. They're working at the filling station, and they see the girls come in, and they get to visit with people. And he said, well, how are you going to get there? I said, I don't know. He said, well, then you can either do this and make a little money and maybe buy a car, or you can. So, hey, when I got old enough to do something else, well, I didn't know how to do nothing else. Everybody said, you know how to change the oil in this car? I said, not really. Had the mechanic to do that. I could get on that horse and ride him around. But, you know, and people was the same way. I mean, the people back lived a long time ago. Not that they didn't want to learn a lot, but they had a more important thing. They were trying to survive. We got to get up and can fruit so we have something to eat in the wintertime. We're kind of like a bunch of ants. You know, we have to worry about tomorrow. So, you know, it's just basically, I don't know if I was born somewhere else that I would be a cowboy.
Well, how did your family come to Oklahoma?
They was from Clinton,
Okay.
down around Clinton,
Uh-huh.
and Taloga, Oakwood, and that country. And my dad's dad had always been a sharecropper. You know, he would farm somebody's ground, and they had moved 4 or 5 times. You know, they'd on different leases. They'd, you know, work farms for a percentage of them, and they come out here because there was a lot of farming that was kind of still that way out here. And actually, they was going to go to work in Henry and everybody. They had some land out at Cimarron County, and they was going to sharecrop that land out there for them. And when they got up here, it was in August, and they was needing help to plant wheat. And so they helped them put in the wheat crop and never left. And that was my granddad and my dad and his own brother. They all worked here for us. Jiggs worked here, but the oldest boy worked here for probably, their oldest boy was born here in 51. They left in maybe 54, so he worked here from 48 to 54. And that was right after the war, and everybody was needing a lot of help. And, you know, there was kind of a shortage of farming people. You know, back then my dad didn't have to go to the war because they tried to leave one boy, unless things got worse, they would leave one boy to work so they could raise wheat, so they could feed the troops, and let the other one go. And the oldest boy went. My dad's brother went in, but he didn't have to go. So, but it was getting bad enough that they had already called him for his second physical when they dropped the bomb. And he said he was on a bus going to Oklahoma City for an induction physical, and they got a hold of him, stopped him, and turned him around, sent him back home. And he didn't have to go. And then they come out here, and like I said, they never left.
Did any of the Hitchmen have to go to the war?
My granddad kind of had the same experience. He got exempted. I think the rule sort of was if you were producing food, you kind of got left out of that deal.
He was but he knew how to fly.
He was the only son.
He was in a merchant marine. He flew stuff around, but only within the state.
He got drafted by the Navy, though,
yeah.
Right? Because he has navies on in some of the pictures, but I don't think he ever left.
But isn't that what the merchant marines? They kind of moved and transported stuff around, but they never left the continental state. But I think he did serve a little bit.
Yeah. Well, Lad was really instrumental in the feedlot business, correct?
Mm-hmm.
When things started really picking up, did he think about innovative ways to design that feedlot?
That's a good question. I mean, he was always tinkering.
He was the most pro education person I was ever around. I mean, he was all the time. His managers, he would send him somewhere. There'd be a school somewhere. He'd say, "Okay, this guy here is doing a lot of stuff we want to know about. Here, you go." I said, "Well,
and when you come back, tell me what."
Yeah, tell me what he said. I went to a ranching for profit school. I've been to I don't know how many different schools, and he sent me to who was the guy that herded the cattle? What was his name? A goofy guy, but he was a herder, and he sent me there, and I come back, and he said, "Well, what'd you learn?" I said, "Well," I said, "he's pretty knowledgeable guy, right?" And he said, "Well, can you do what he can do?" And I said, "No." He said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, I could send you to a bronc riding school too, and you go for 3 days. I said, "You think you can ride broncs when you get back?" He said, "Why not?" "Well enough," he said.
Yeah.
But I said, "I think that's good, but he's all time they have all of these different things like at OSU, or I've been to those, I've been to national grass conferences, I've been, he's always sending you somewhere. He sent us to Denver to look at Wagyu cattle. He was he told me once, he said, "My biggest fear is going somewhere and not having something to read." He had a satchel with him all the time, and he'd have at least 3 books in it. And anytime we went to Panhandle State, if we went to Garden City College, if we went to OSU, he went into the bookstore and he'd buy books. I don't know how many books that man read.
We probably threw away 15,000. His wife.
He said, "I always like
we couldn't give them away
to be knowledgeable enough to carry on an intelligent conversation with anybody about anything." And I said, and he could. He could talk about a lot of stuff and had a little bit of knowledge about it. Well, one time we was branding calves right down there, and there was some boys here, and it was right after the Indianapolis 500. So they started talking about it. And I thought, I got you. So I went over and I got in there, and I said, "Well, who won this lap?" By God, he knew. I said, "Shit, this guy knows a lot of stuff now. If he knows that, I ain't gonna question him." But
he was one of those people that had, I wouldn't say 100%, but pretty close to 100% recall on reading. And he didn't really read anything. He just kind of skimmed it. But that's, it was amazing. he would go through blah 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 blah. Mario Andretti has led 7,332 laps of the Indy 500 in his career, and he'll remember it. I mean, that's what he'll glom onto, and then blah 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 blah, and then it'll kick out another interesting stat or figure. And he could, I mean, it was really, as a kid growing up, it was really kind of annoying. But I mean, he knew, he just knew facts and figures, and all of them. I mean, it was just unbelievable how much he could remember. But you asked about, innovating the feedlot, and I mean, they were built when I was born. I mean, they were already a going concern. Did he invent stuff? I think that when he saw something he thought was worthwhile,
he pursued it.
He wanted to explore it, and so he would either contact people, hire people, do it on his own, So even if he maybe wasn't the person that thought of it, innovation, maybe refinement would have been a better way to put it. Mm-hmm. He was always interested in knowing how you did that, what you did, and can I do it or do it better?
Yeah, and I want to try some of it.
Yeah. I mean,
like if somebody was doing something over there, I'd say, lad, do we want to do what he's doing? Well, I don't know if we want to do everything like that, but I want some of it. I want a little bit of it. And then we'll find out if we want to do more. But, I mean, he's always, I want to try everything, but you never know what's going to work and what's not. Let's try it. He said, some things we can do, some things we can't do. But unless you try it, you don't know. Well, he was amazing about stuff like that. He always was reading. And then he got on health food kick. And he would get on to me. I'd go somewhere and I'd get a candy bar and a Coke. He said, you ought to not eat that. I said, why? He said, it's not good for you. I said, but I like it. He said, well, but you shouldn't eat it. You should eat some. I got some, what was it, some hydrated, some kind of vegetable juice or something.
Oh, yeah.
He said, here, he gave me some one day.
He was convinced.
And it was terrible.
I don't know exactly what magic it had, but he would squeeze carrots and celery every morning. This is juice. To get the juicer, but carrots and celery were apparently the magic concoction. And you couldn't do it the night before because whatever magic was in the carrots and juice that night, by morning it was gone. You had to have it fresh. And so, and I don't know if you guys, have you ever juiced a carrot? There's not a lot of juice in it. So there's a lot of carrots that have to be juiced in order to get a cup, and he had like a mason jar, quart mason jar. And so I don't know. I mean, my grandmother, bless her heart, she was raised she was very subservient to her husband, and that was the way she was raised. I don't know what time she got up in the morning. 4?
Yeah.
So that she could have all the carrots juiced. And of course, Lad was raised at a time when if you wanted milk for breakfast, you had to go milk the cow. Our milking shed's right there. So he would get up in the morning before he had to go to school. He would get up, go do chores, one of which was including, getting some milk, bring it back to the house, eat breakfast, drink his milk or whatever they ate and drank, and then he would get on a horse and go ride to school. The school was, it's 4 miles down the road here, till he was, I think, 5th grade. And during that time period while you were at the country school, you kind of just went at whatever pace you could go. So he actually, over the course of years, was an age younger than the classmates that he was in 5th grade. So he got a lot of fights, liked fighting. But his mother would, of course, he still had to do his chores. He had to get up a lot earlier now because now he had to ride a buckboard in town. So he'd get up, milk cows, gather eggs, all that stuff, bring it in, cook breakfast, eat breakfast, hitch a team, get in the wagon, go to town, drop him off at school. She would come home, have to make lunch for all the ranch hands, make supper for all the ranch hands, go back into town, get him, bring him back home. It's a long day, an exhausting day, I can imagine. And the love for reading, and I don't know how much of this is actually true. This is where you have a guy with a glass of scotch. Let me tell you a story you don't know about. The guy that had the general store in Guymon. My great grandfather, or maybe even my great great grandfather, loaned him some money, helped him to get started at the soda fountain there in town. And it was more of a, I mean, probably more like a dry goods store, I don't know, but it had books and a rack that you could read. And Lad, as a result of the loan that my forefathers had given to him to help him start his store, after church or after school, Lad would wander down there and stay in the store until his mother could make it into town to pick him up. Now, one of the side benefits is guess what? She probably needed stuff as well. So, you went to the general store. Well, there's Lad sitting there. But what was he doing? Reading the books that were available for sale, and magazines that were available for sale. So that's where part of his early development of loving to read came from. Now, the tie-in with that is that years later, in the early 80s, the ag business was terrible. It was kind of like the Dust Bowl. We were like closer to bankruptcy or about there or whatever. And maybe it was early in that, maybe it was the 70s. I'm not quite sure. Before I really knew anything about it. But one of our kind of cattle buyer feedlot manager guys was in, I believe, St. Louis. It might have been Chicago. Depends on probably how much scotch he had. But he was at a bar and was chatting with a young banker. And the banker was complaining about having to, you need me to stop? He was complaining about having to, if they had too much income, they needed a tax write-off. And of course, we needed cattle in the feed yard. So they kind of got a napkin out and penciled out some figures and said, I think that we can do this. I think this will work out and everybody will be happy. Well, my grandfather hated bankers. Hated them. But eventually Bob Hilliard convinced my grandfather that we need to go see this guy in St. Louis or Kansas City or Chicago or wherever he was. And Bob got Lad to go, and Lad finally went. They're sitting in this chairman of this bank in Kansas City. And the guy says, now let me get this. Let me make sure I have all this right. You're Lad. I'm in Oklahoma. Oh my God, all this stuff. Let me tell you. Your family loaned my family the money to start this business, which got me through college, which got me this job. My dad was the guy that had the soda fountain shop. And they fed 100,000 head of cattle with this and saved the day and all that stuff. So I don't know if it's true or not, but that was, this huge long story about this, but that's where it all began. And, one of those things you think that's not impossible, but I asked my dad later on, and he verified that at least the bare bones of the story is true. So, one of those deals you just wouldn't believe what happened. But I can't imagine. I mean, riding a buckboard to town.
He was always good about taking power naps too. Like he would sit, and I don't know how he would do it, but he would brace like this and go to sleep. And I guarantee you, I don't know how many meetings we was in. If they shut the lights off for a slideshow, he was out. And I always wondered, I think, gosh, I wonder what he'd do if I did that. But I thought, well, he's paying me, I better stay away. But he would go to sleep, or I think he would sleep, and then it would be done, and he'd ask questions. And I said, how can he do this? But they used to laugh about it in church. Because he would sit there like that, and he would just kind of be braced, and he'd never move. His head had never moved for 2 hours of the church. But the preacher always said he would sleep every Sunday. But he, and your dad he'd get a little naughty too, at the meetings.
How did Vlad meet his wife?
I probably should know that. I probably did.
Panhandle State.
Is that where?
She was
a dance teacher.
She was a teacher over at Panhandle State. She was teaching ballroom dancing and different stuff over here. And Lad had went to school at Stillwater, and then he went over here and took some classes. Anyway, they met over there. She was from Bayan. Her dad was in the sale barn in Bayan. So she was kind of cattle oriented. She rode and everything. She had been I don't know, she had a saddle at one time that was she was rodeo queen of the Fort Smith, Arkansas rodeo. Yeah. But she rode when she was young.
Did they dance?
Oh yeah.
If she taught
Yeah.
dances, did they have to?
I can't imagine my grandfather dancing as she was.
He did.
Shuffle
He
step,
danced.
shuffle step,
But
step.
she was a dance instructor. Matter of fact, she tried to make us kids out here be a dancer. Now that's one thing that they didn't beat on me, but we'd go down there and she had a little dance studio in her basement, had rails and mirrors and everything. Her daughter was a dancer, and Paul danced some, and Jim danced a lot, and so she thought, well, we need to dance. I said, nah, I ain't going there. So I ain't gonna tap dance or nothing. So we didn't do that.
Could have been Fred Astaire instead.
I could have been. Maybe that's my calling. And she was in the musical thing. She liked entertaining. Their aunt, Jane, she still entertains.
Mm-hmm. She's an actress.
She was Miss Oklahoma, and she sang and danced. And then Tina, she danced and sang. And
Well, it's not all work.
what's that?
It's not all work. All work and no play.
No, well,
Well, the girls got a lot of it.
to me that would have been more work. I'd rather work than do that. I didn't like that very much.
Did Lad graduate from a OAMC?
Yep.
Oklahoma A&M?
I think he went 2 years to Panhandle State and then transferred down at the time.
I think that they went back down there after they got married.
Oh, did it?
What was his major? Agriculture? Or you don't know?
Specifically, I don't know, ag something, but I don't know what that would have even been called.
Okay.
Dad was animal science. My brother was ag econ. I was ANSI. And then I got my master's at OSU in my business. My brother's a lawyer. He went to OU, but we don't really talk about that. And then see here, my dad went to Stanford Business School after that. Many moons ago.
And all my family are OPSU graduates. My wife, my 2 boys, my brother, his oldest son. All of them.
Well, before we start talking more about what's happening on the farm today, let's jump back and talk a little bit about record keeping back in the day and how it's changed over time.
Well, I mean, we spoke briefly about it earlier, but everything that they did was written down somewhere. We've got stacks of little books, and whenever you went into town and you bought a barrel of flour in the late 1800s, they kept a note of that someplace. Obviously now things have changed a little bit. We have computers and we have scanners and everything else. We're still pretty fastidious about our records, but it was certainly a much different type of system back then.
They had a daily log.
Yeah.
Everything that they did, they wrote down. They moved cattle, bought cattle, sold cattle, bought pig feed, bought horse feed. They had a lot of day help. They had a lot of custom farmers back then. Somebody would come and plow for them. And they pay them 3 cents an acre. So they write down, so-and-so, I owe them 160 acres, $3 an acre. They burned kerosene. They always had. They bought kerosene. They bought heating oil. All of their goods. They kept records had to. You had to know where your money went. You had to know how much you had.
Did they trust the banks?
Well, I don't know. The banks, that's what a lot of people say caused the depression. So I don't know that anybody at that era for a while trusted the bank. You know, I know my grandfather, he didn't like bankers at all. Of course, he didn't have a lot of money, but the bank was not federally insured, and he lost what money he did have. Never got it back when the depression hit. That would kind of make you sour when you're struggling to.
Didn't have much, but you did have.
Right, you're struggling to feed your kids. Of course, the people never had it quite as bad as the people that lived in the town during the Depression and the Dust Bowl, because of the, they did understand how to grow things. And what my dad always said, he said, we didn't have shoes, but nobody else did, but we never went hungry. We always had meat to eat, and milk, and eggs, and then when my folks come here, always here until 1971 or 2, we always had fresh milk here. And the ranch owned some milk cows, and they milked, and they gave milk to all of the guys that worked on the farm, the ranch, the feedlot. Everybody got, a quart of milk twice a day or so, raw milk. And then at one time they had a big chicken house over here, and everybody got eggs free. They had a bunch of chickens. They go out and gather the eggs every morning. Somebody washed them, and they set them out, however many you wanted. Take them. That was part of your wage.
Yeah, he's right about that as far as somebody in New York City that lives inside of a city. People weren't very mobile anyway, and then no food.
They had no way to get it.
Yeah, where are you going to go? What are you going to do?
Unless you stole it from somebody, that's basically the only way to eat.
Here, they at least had some food around. They didn't have anything else. And really, the stuff that they had didn't really belong to them, because the bank owned everything.
And it wasn't worth nothing.
Of course, the bank was broke, so they didn't care either.
Nobody had any money to buy it, so it really had no value. My dad said they always used to keep the calves off the milk cows when he was a kid. He said he remember him and his brother taking them to Oklahoma City and haul a 300 or 400 pound calf over there and bring $6. And then the government at one point went through and they said, well, we got too many cattle, and they come out and bought them, run them off into the silo, shot them, buried them to reduce the numbers. So they was trying to push the price of meat up, which they never got done. The only thing that brought us out of depression was World War II. Put everybody to work, made them all forget about not having nothing. If you didn't have nothing, join the army. They'll give you some shoes. And you go shoot at somebody, but they'll feed you, clothe you. They had a WPA. It helped some underclass people too. At least it fed their kids. I know. We had a Mexican fella here that was a very knowledgeable old man, and he went to work for. He left New Mexico. They didn't have nothing out there, and it's during the Depression, so he joined the WPA. Went to Georgia. He was working down there building bridges and roads construction, whatever he could do. And then World War II broke out, so I think most of those boys that was in the WPA, they jumped out. They said this might be a better deal than the WPA. At least you get a paycheck. WPA, they didn't pay much. They just fed and clothed you. The main street in Guymon was built during the WPA. It was built by the WPA.
Bricks.
The bricks, they laid bricks by hand for 2 blocks. All of Main Street.
You mentioned over time you need a lot of hands to help work the land. And in those early days, you had a bunkhouse. Can you kind of describe some of the living structures that were here for the employees?
Well, this house here, on the back of it, there was a room now that's basically my wife's closet. And there was three sets of bunk beds. There were 6 guys lived there. There was no TV. And, they furnished their meal. You get up and go eat breakfast at the cookhouse. And then you went to work, and you come in and you ate dinner at the cookhouse, and then you ate your supper there, and then went to bed. That was it. And if you want to go to town, you're just 12 miles away. And then they had a bunkhouse that was on up on a hill, and it was a basement, and there was 4 sets of bunk beds in there, so they could house. And they provided, it was like you got, as part of your wage, you got 3 meals a day, and you got to live there, plus you got clean linen twice a week, and towels twice a week, and that was all provided by the company. And then in the 70s, then they started hiring quite a few of the migrant workers. And I hear a lot of people talking about the Mexicans today, and I said, we caused this. We brought them up here and gave them employment, and then we expected them, after they was here for a while, leave. Don't stay here. So, we caused all that stuff by employing them, and at the get-go, like I'd say 75% of all the Mexicans that's here now are from around a state of Durango. They would work here, and then they would write back and say, hey, there's work up here, it's a pretty good place to live. Well, then more of the family comes. I got a boy that's working for me that's been here ever since he's 14. And there was 9 kids in his family, and they're all in the United States. And his parents are here. And then, they outnumbered us since then. They have big families. And I don't say Mexicans as a derogatory deal. My wife gets on to me for calling them Mexicans. She said, they're Hispanic. I said, well, they might be Hispanic. She said, well, why do you call them Mexicans? I said, because they're from Mexico. I said, if they're from England, I would call them Kinky. I wouldn't call a Frenchman an Englishman. Because it's just location. I'm not
Certainly,
I'm not,
back in the 70s, there was no Guatemalan, Honduran, Costa Rican. That migration didn't exist. The people that were here were truly born in Mexico, crossed illegally, and got work here. There were no documents. There was no. Yeah, immigration would come by periodically. People would run and hide.
There's one boy that worked here. This is kind of a funny story. He come here. He had a Social Security card, and it was all 7s. Now, what is the odds of that? And my dad looked at it and he said, Marcelino, is this your card? He said, yes. Got my name on it. Of course, he's illiterate still. He can't read or write, even Spanish stuff. But he had this card, and it was all 7s. He said, you're sure? He said, yes. So he wrote it down. They paid Social Security to that card for, I don't know, until he got another card. And he basically got amnesty when Ronald Reagan gave all of them amnesty. They could get documentation at that time. And since then, he married a girl that was from Mexico too, but she has become a citizen, and they've raised 4 girls.
Has it been easy or hard to find labor through the years to work on the farm?
It waxes and wanes. Skilled workers for the ranch, i.e. cowboys. harder and harder and harder and harder and harder. Just a way of life that is dying off.
Play with computers now.
Yeah.
You don't have to be cowboys.
Farmville or whatever, download an app. But the people that work in the feedlot, people that work on our farms, most of the jobs, if you have somebody that's willing to try and learn and spend some time and not get frustrated and be careful and safe and not get hurt, you can pretty much teach them almost any job that's out there. Prior to 2008, yeah, I mean, you couldn't find anybody, but everybody was employed around here. The only people that weren't employed around here, and when I say everybody, I mean, there's like 2.5% unemployment. The people that were not employed were underage, retired, or Latino moms. And there's a reason why you didn't have them employed. It's because they have 4 children. Well, if you have 4 children, and each child requires $20 a day babysitting fee, well, that's $80, and their job was only going to pay them $40 a day. It made pretty good sense just to stay home. So one of the things, we were going to do a bunch of different things. I mean, it kind of sounds terrible. Thank goodness that everything went to hell in 2008, because it opened up the labor pool a lot around here. But we were going to try a daycare so we hire daycare workers and certify it, and then we could hire some of these young women and do it for free, get them in, and then we could actually get workers. That's kind of the desperation we were in. What kind of compounded that problem is in the early 90s is when Seaboard moved in. The pigs moved into the area. And it was the population of the Panhandle was about 19,000 in 1900 for Beaver, Texas, and Cimarron counties. And the population in 1990 was about 19,000 in Beaver, Texas, and Cimarron county. Maybe the demographics have shifted around a little bit. There's less people on the farm, more people in the city. But the numbers were about the same. When Seaboard moved in, that kind of created a huge vacuum. And that was in the early 90s, 93 or something like that. 94 is when they began kind of building their hog operation in this area. And basically that vacuum didn't stop sucking until 2008. And what happened then is when everybody else from all over the country kind of got fired and laid off, they migrated here. And while the labor market is still really tight here, and especially for what I would consider, lots of people want a job, but they don't want to do anything. They don't want to work. They don't want to learn anything. They don't want to sweat. They don't want to, oh, I went to college. You're not going to let me run the company tomorrow? I mean, we have a PhD nutritionist that started out at the bottom of the feed yard when he came out of college. Now, if you hire a PhD nutritionist the first year out of college, he expects to be running the entire nutrition program for your company. I mean, expectations are stupid, really. But that's not any different than the 17-year-old kid that dropped out of high school. He doesn't want to run a shovel either. So, is good help hard to find? Yeah, it is. There are workers applying, and some of them are good, and some of them are really willing to learn something and try something new, even though they have no experience whatsoever. To have somebody that has a lot of experience and a lot of talent, somebody finds that person and they keep them wherever they're at. They don't want that person leaving, because that's who's going to train all the people that don't know anything about it, about the job.
Our field is getting where there's hardly any. I mean, even in the rodeo, what you will see in the rodeo in the bigger picture is your calf ropers and people like that are basically horse people. Most of those people was ranch raised, or they just had knowledge of horses and had access to learning how to do that. I mean, your bull riders come from everywhere, and a lot of the rodeo cowboys today are not cowboys at all anyway. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're athletes, and that's basically what they are. But they don't have the opportunity to even start to do it. So consequently, when they get older, they're not going to do it. Only the people that started doing it when they were young are going to stay in that game. But it's the same way as what I was telling you about myself. I mean, I didn't have the opportunity to do nothing else. If I wanted to get up and do something, this was your job. Or you could catch a ride with the farmers up there and drive tractor all day. I didn't want to do that. Or you could mow the lawn. I didn't want to do that. So.
Well, at the feed yard, for example, there's three main departments. There's maintenance, cattle, and feed. So to make it real simplistic, there's two jobs on the feed yard that I probably can't teach you how to do. One of them is welding. I might be able to get you where you could get two pieces of metal and kind of stick them together decently enough that it's not going to fall apart. That'll take some time, and I'll have to invest quite a bit of money in you. But, I mean, we could probably do it. And besides that, the welders are pretty nice these days. I mean, they take a lot of the guesswork out of it. But the other one is cowboy. I can't teach you how to cowboy. You either know how when you get there, even poorly, but you have to know how to ride a horse, saddle a horse, get around. Well, but I can teach you how to drive a truck, drive a tractor, run a shovel. I mean, that's pretty easy. There's not a lot of thought to that one. I can teach you how to do that.
Our industry's got to where a lot of it too is getting back into instead of having knowledgeable people and only offsets you can have is to have protocol, in my opinion. You get a set of cattle and you think you're going to have trouble with them, and you're concerned if you don't have guys that can pick out the sick ones and not. Well, in order to fix that, let's just give them all a shot. I mean, we can tell them to do that. Let's just give everything a shot. And then we've already covered that. And then we'll try to treat the ones that do get sick after. So a lot of the feedlots have went to an operation like that where you just treat everything the same and try to lessen your problem. Instead of having some people that can take care of, saying, well, this one's sick and this one's sick and this one's sick, and the rest of them, they don't need that. So a lot of it is where to be simpler, and when you don't have the people or the people to train the people or can't get the people to train, let's just do this, and then the vaccination program, we'll vaccinate for 32 different things.
Seven way, a 5 way.
Yeah, we'll give them a 7-way, a 5-way. We'll do this, and we'll give them a real strong antibiotic upon arrival, and hope we don't have no problem. Because it's hard to find people that can, and to get people to stay and go through the training. And then over the years, I've seen them try to train feedlot management here. Well, if they do train somebody and they get a pretty good guy, well, if you don't have a opening for him right then, he's gone. Caprock Industries, they'll see him and they say, hey, this guy just went through all this stuff. He's pretty good. I'll let's see if I can hire him. Well, a lot of times they get it done. Because you don't have an opening for him, so what are you going to do with him? Put him back to doing something that he's already done and not progress him, and he don't want to wait, so he just goes somewhere else. I don't know how many people like that have you had, 2 or 3?
More than that.
Yeah, that they train for feedlot management. And
one of the things you mentioned is one of the things there was a time when ag education, going out, learning about agriculture, and coming home and trying to grow a company or work for somebody else, it's a pretty common deal. But no one wants to live in Guymon. And that's become, with the exception of my cousin over here from Bethesda, Maryland, we don't know why he's here, but he loves it, so I'm not going to ask questions. So we've had a policy it started right after I got back in 98, somewhere in there. We kind of just started saying that we take pretty much 100% of applicants for internship from anywhere in the company or a country. We do a little bit of background work. One, they have to be an ag student, or they have to be we vet to make sure that they're not just animal rights activists. But you know, our policy is if you apply for a job for Hitch for a summer internship as a legitimate, you know, ag person wanting to get experience, whether it's in cattle, hogs, vet, farming, whatever, we'll take it. Period. End of discussion. We won't. There's no application or there's no interview process, nothing like that. The difficulty out here is housing. You can't find any housing. I've tried and pled and begged with Panhandle State to let them use a dorm, you know, to let them rent a dorm space from them, but it's not worked out. And that's usually the barrier. Now, the idea, of course, is that one of these interns will turn around and come back. We have one working for us. She was from Florida, going to school at Washington State, and graduated and couldn't find a job, so she approached me about an internship. And my view on an internship is simple. We take them all, but there's a definite start date, and more importantly, there's a definite end date. And it's like a 2-month-long interview process. She was great. She was there for about 3 weeks, and the guy's like, "You don't mind if I just hire her?" And that's what she was really hunting. So we hired her, and she's still with us today. And in fact, we're trying to get her into graduate school at OOHRP. But they're very few and far between. Finding educated college graduates that are interested in doing ranch-style work and farm labor is just really hard. The only ones we hire, by and large, are local. They can't, you know, they grew up in Guymon. They moved someplace, went to school for a few years, graduated, maybe got married, and then now decided they want to come back home and raise their family. So it's just really difficult to find something like that. And it's a little disheartening. You know, you come from around here, you can't hire anybody who's got an education. A lot of people say, "Oh, I'd rather hire somebody School of Hard Knocks," but then they have a few interns that are really good, and they start realizing that there's a lot of times there's a value there to having somebody who's maybe just a tick smarter, pretty motivated, very interested in knowledge and learning about stuff. Whereas a lot of kids, you know, they don't. They're in it for money. They come out.
A lot of these towns are dying.
Yeah.
Boise City, Oklahoma, their average age of the people that's there, like 65 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the family farms is there. There's some of those families that I've known in my whole life. And there was 4 kids in the family. Well, all of them but one's left. Mm-hmm. And they went somewhere and got a family, and they're moved, and they went to college, and now they're living in Houston. And when the older parents die, they're not going back. They're not going back. If they go back, they ain't going to take their wife. Because she ain't going to go back to Boise City and leave Houston, Texas. Ain't going to happen. So, it's just, you know, if you don't marry a girl from out in here, and you know, the big corporate farms, with the technology, we don't need big families. We don't, I mean, when my dad was working here in the 70s, we had 17 guys on payroll here. Now I got 5.
Wow.
So, you know, it's a different world. It's not, you know, the equipment's better. The pickups last, you know, back then, if you had a pickup that had 70,000 miles on it, it probably needs to be overhauled. And the front end was wore out, you wouldn't keep the junk. I mean, now then, 200,000 miles on your pickup, it's still a pretty good truck. Well, that's pretty good. It's just a different world. I mean, the technology today is so much better. That, you know, and too, you know, just like we're saying, the vaccination programs and your antibiotics and all the stuff that you have available. When my dad come here in 48, they didn't even have penicillin. They doctored cattle here with sulfur drink. A sulfur drink is a liquid. And my brother and I went with him one day, and we was riding along. We were just little big kids. My daddy used to tell their story. They would catch these cattle, and they'd take these old whiskey bottles, and they'd mix this drink up in there, you know. And then they'd catch this calf, and they'd roll him up on his side, and then reach in, get a hold of his tongue, and take this bottle, and hopefully he swallowed it before he'd run down his lungs. Well, we was riding along there, and my brother, as my daddy, he doctored a couple, and both of them had expired. And he said, Dad, he said, because all these cattle died that you doctored. My dad said, well, what do you say? But and he said, they talked about a miracle drug. Penicillin, bad things about war, but there is good things about war, is they can get a lot of new drugs because they have a lot of experimental patients. Penicillin didn't come out till after World War II. And then you had liquamycin and, some of these drugs, the bugs that was in cattle then, they had never been exposed to any of this. And my dad said it was like magic. He said you could have it pretty sick and give him a shot, or he'd be a lot better or well, one time. Today it's a different deal. Of course, over the years, I would say that there has been maybe 2 million cattle through the corral system here, and all the time that Hitches have had their feedlots, maybe more than that. Cattle in, cattle out. So as far as having bugs and everything, there's probably every bug that's ever been known to a bovine is in that ground. So, you better be vaccinated for them and protecting yourself. They never had clostridiums with like blackleg and all that stuff until right before World War II. And a lot of the cattle back then, in order to save them, you moved them because the spores got into the ground. So what you do is if you start losing a bunch of cattle, you go pick up what you had left. You start driving them. And whatever fell off and died, don't worry about that. Just get the cattle on a new place. Get them away from where they was at. Well, hopefully, we'll wait a while and then we'll come back. And our cattle might get a little bit of immunity to it.
Which translates to a lot more health.
It was called, that disease then was blackleg, and what it did is the reason they could tell what it was, like you split the hide on their back leg after they die, they get real stiff, and they just fall over and die, and then you cut it open and their flesh is black. A lot of these things that we come up with is, good and bad. I mean, there's a lot of people that really talk bad about our drugs, and DT corn, DT corn.
GMO, genetically modified.
They think that's terrible. And, I don't know whether it is or it isn't, but, those people never been hungry. I guarantee you, if you throw an ear of corn over there and say, well, this is a GMO corn, you can eat it or not, but that's all you're getting. I'll bet you they'll eat it. I would.
No atheists and foxholes. When you're starving, you don't worry about GMO stuff.
Right.
First world problem, I guess.
That's right. Well, tell me a little bit about your father.
Paul, born in 43. Mother Lawless, Dad Henry, Ladd Jr. He was school in Guymon, went to college at OSU, went to graduate school in Stanford. My mom was from Bartlesville. They met at college. Got married afterwards, and then basically moved back here and lived here till he died. Dad was kind of, the first generation builds it, second generation shores it up, third generation loses it. That's kind of stories that they have about, family businesses. Dad Ladd, the first generation built it up, second generation, he kind of expanded it, shored it up, and Ladd built it again, if you will. Dad definitely kind of took a good thing and put a lot of concrete blocks underneath the foundation to make it solid. While Dad did technically get us involved with the hogs, there's no doubt that the reason we're so involved with the hogs is not that. It was Ladd. Ladd, he always wanted to go 1,000 miles. And he never dipped a toe before he jumped head first.
You want to try some of it?
Yeah, he wanted to try some of it. 300,000 head a year. So apparently some, right? You know, he was dad was the one that courted Seaboard, helped pave the way for the state government, the local government. Politicked a lot in favor of getting Seaboard out here. Pre-Seaboard, we had a beef packer, Swift, in town. It had closed in the early 80s, maybe 84, 85, something like that. So Guymon's population in the city was pretty unhealthy. Dad was all for it, and he was instrumental in getting it into the local area. Dad, he was certainly his father's son. Both of them loved the commodity market a lot, maybe too much. The Seaboard hogs specifically, when they got involved and we started growing hogs, there's a side of the commodity business which is very unpredictable. You know, seasonality, cyclical nature of the commodity business, where I don't raise a dole pineapple. I raise a pig. You know, as far as the guy in Dallas, all pigs are the same, right? I mean, one pig's the same as another pig, so it's pretty hard to differentiate your product. I don't have a packing company where I can put a pretty label on it and sell it as a premium product. I'm on the other end. I'm the guy that has everything that's the same, homogeneous product. So, you know, Lad, he loved it, but what you had to do whenever you're raising cattle, especially in the volumes that we had in hogs and the volumes that we were proposing, the volatility of the market can make you and break you within a very, very small period of time. Within a couple of years, you can go from doing very well, making a lot of money, to losing everything. The commodity markets in Chicago developed as a way to reduce risk and trade future quantities of a product that is not yet produced. For us, if you have a fat animal, you know he's going to sell in February, and you can look out there to the February contract and see that price at a profit. You can sell your animals on the commodity board and call it hedge the animal, and reduce your risk. There's risk involved with the commodity board, but it's sort of like gambling. If you don't have a product that you're protecting. If you're just trading speculators, it's a bit of you're just investing in gambling. I mean,
Playing poker.
Yeah, you buy
Like
low,
sitting
sell
down
high.
at a poker table. Whatever somebody's losing on the trade,
Yeah,
somebody else make it.
Somebody else may. If we have cattle though, we're not gambling. We're offsetting risk. We're laying off risk to the speculator on the other side of that trade. So what evolved was my grandfather, and then later on, after my grandfather semi-retired and eventually passed away, my dad and my grandfather did much, maybe not quite all, but the vast majority of the commodity trade. I loved it. I love trading. Over the years, that's sort of what, besides, Dad was a consummate politician. He was very good in the crowd. He could work a crowd. He could talk to lots of people and really get around. Lad was sort of the same way, although he did a better job, less at a podium and more in just a crowd, like a group. The best thing that they said, that one of my feed yard managers, the best thing we could do ever was send Lad on vacation. If he would go on vacation, he'd come back with 45,000 head of cattle being sent to the feed yard. Dad wasn't that tight. He couldn't work that convention and state fair or vacation type crowd at all. But he could stand up in front of a group of people and talk to them really well. So he ended up spending a lot of time in leadership positions within our industry with National Cattlemen's Beef Association, Texas Cattle Feeders, Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association, National Cattlemen's Association, which was the predecessor to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. He was in various leadership positions all throughout his career.
He would have been the president.
He would have been the president, but he died. Well, he would have made it to the presidency, but he would have died during the presidency. So he stepped down and decided not to serve. But between those two jobs, that really became his career. while he did manage the operations, his philosophy was much like my brother and I have adopted as well. Was I can run the company, and I love to run the company, but I can hire you to do much of the day-to-day operations work. Yes, no, can you hire this person? Can you fire this person? What do we got to do about this? I'll do the 35,000 foot level. You do the minutia and the detail. I can do as much good for our company and the industry at large in Washington D.C. or in Oklahoma City. That's where the real change happens, good and bad. And so Dad and to a lesser extent, like I said, Lad, that's where they spent a lot of their career. Now, when they weren't out doing that side of the business, they were at home, and like I said, that's what they loved to do. They loved commodities. So they did almost 100. Well, Dad did 100% of the hedging for the hog up until the moment he died. Lad, towards the twilight of his, well, I guess life, he was well past retirement age when he died. He had sort of stepped out of the company, really, but all he did was he still got up at 5 o'clock in the morning and went to the office and spent all day at the office, Saturday and Sunday, except for church. He went to church. But what did he commit trade commodities for himself now? He would do neat little things like, Chris, I'm going to give you $20,000. But I'm going to take it right back, okay? It's yours. This is yours. I'm going to invest it in pigs, okay? And sometimes I saw the money again. Sometimes I never saw the money. But that's, I think that was like he gave himself permission. He could do it because he was doing it on my behalf at that point. Whenever Dad died, I won't say it almost broke the company, but it was bad. The reason being is that we had done a poor job reducing our risk on commodity trade because my dad was the person that did the trading. No one else had permission to do anything. I'm not allowed to touch that. That was his sacred cow. Couple that with a horrible market at the time. Dad had developed cancer and slowly but surely had migrated out of the office. I mean, he was still coming in on occasion, but he was pretty much done. And so we really didn't have any direction, didn't have any hedging. So whenever he passed away, it was a huge blow to the company, not because we were left without management. We had management. We just had, 150,000 head of hogs that were very ugly at the time. We were giving them away. I think we were selling a fat hog to our employees for $40. Come pick it up. 260-pound animal, that's 25 cents, 15 cents.
They went down to 8 at one time.
So, and our break even was somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 cents.
Right after you all got full bore into the business, the hog market was the worst it had ever been in history.
40 cents a pound.
8 cents a pound.
Yeah, 40 cents a pound approximately was our break even. And they were selling for 8. I don't know if we quite got to 8 cents, but we might have been 11 or something like that.
That's what we paid that time, Chris. I paid 8 cents a pound to y'all and took the pig over to Panhandle and had it processed. It cost me 32 cents a pound to have it processed.
So,
and 8 cents a pound to buy it.
It was a bad, I talk about baptism by fire for myself. Now, in Dad's defense, he's not here to defend himself. He didn't do anything wrong. That was the way the work was allocated. And he was still alive. He was the boss. That's the way we did it. On hindsight now, obviously we could have done a much better job of delegating tasks, and we do that now. I mean, we've changed the way we do that by a lot. But at the time, that was what Dad liked to do, and that's the way we did it. As far as Dad, he spent, he was president of Texas Cattle Feeders right when I got back, right around 98 or so. Texas Cattle Feeders and National Cattlemen's Beef Association. National Cattlemen's Beef Association is obviously the national lobbying arm for the cattle industry. Texas Cattle Feeders Association is the lobbying arm for the Texas Feedlots. Well, we're not in Texas. We're close enough to Texas that we kind of were under their geographic area. They and the Kansas Livestock Association were probably the two largest, by and large, CAFO representatives. NCBA represents all of cattle, and those two represent more so confined feeding operations. So clout-wise, that's where they were at. Dad's very, very, very active in those, believed in it. He was a very strong proponent for the industry, for the lifestyle, the business, the thought process behind it. And really, like I said, that's what he did his whole career doing. I mean, all I can remember growing up, it was always, National Cattlemen's Association, which morphed into National Cattlemen's Beef Association. Where was the winter trip? Which was in February. San Diego? Was it in, Dallas? Was it in someplace else? This was kind of pre-Santa Fe becoming the convention capital for the southern states. But yeah, so I mean, even when I was a little child, that's where we took vacations. That's where our vacation was the National Beef Association's annual meeting, wherever it was held. And so, that's how I grew up. And that's really, like I said, that's how he focused his career was, I'll hire somebody to do the day-to-day work. I'll try to, sort of like anybody else, nobody wants to talk to the politician's assistant. They want to talk to the politician. Well, Dad felt like he could get a foot in the door, whereas maybe if he sent someone else, that wouldn't happen.
Well, how did you start learning the business, you and your brother?
Gosh, I'm kind of like Rick.
What were some of your chores growing up?
I didn't have chores. Not like that. We didn't have no cows. There were chickens when I was a little bitty kid. We still had chickens, but they were gone shortly thereafter. But I mean, I spent every summer from being very small. Well, Jake's how old?
Jake is
32?
Yeah, born in 79.
So 30, no, he'd be 34, 34. I'm 41, so 6 or 7 years, somewhere in there is about where we should.
You're as much older than him as your dad was me.
Okay. Whenever Jake, I can remember when I was a little kid, Jake being a little kid, being born, and I was hanging out at the barn. So Jake might have been 3 or something like that, but I was already there. So I mean, I don't really remember not hanging around the ranch. And like I said, I can remember all the workers being here, but I was a little kid when that happened. They'd all sit right here, actually. I mean, at lunchtime and in the morning, we gathered right here, and everybody kind of got their marching orders and we dispersed like a herd of cats. And but I always grew up doing stuff. Now my brother, he didn't stay on the ranch. I never left the ranch. I never worked at the feed yards. I never worked for the farm. I never did any of that. I just stayed right here. My brother, he worked for a summer at the shop in the feed yard. He worked for our vet. She had a lot of different jobs growing up. I don't think he ever liked horses that much. I did. I was allergic to them. I finally outgrew that. But Jason, he never really had that much interest. Now he did a lot of different jobs, just not on the ranch. So I mean, my dad didn't force me into anything. He didn't, get up the track, Don, I want you to go do this, and this, because he wasn't that way either. I don't think Lad said you need to go out and be doing this type of job or having this type of labor. Whereas Lad was 12 years old and had a hay crew to manage. Very different world. Dad wasn't pressured into that. I wasn't pressured into that. But nonetheless, whenever it came time to go to college and learn some stuff, we ended up in ag, of course.
I think you got to the point where, you didn't have to. I mean, it became more of a business. I mean, you need somebody to take care of the business, and you can hire somebody to be a cowboy. You can hire somebody to do this. You don't spend your time doing that. You go learn how to run this thing, and then let somebody else do it.
Like I said,
you take care of the business end of it. Hire somebody to because it's their labor.
Yeah, and how do you put this? When I went to college and studied animal science, with focus on business, um, there was, I could have studied Greek mythology if I wanted to. My dad put no pressure on me to do anything. But at the same time, I can't remember ever considering a career anywhere else. I mean, I never sat around and said, gosh, I wonder what it would be like to be a lawyer or a doctor. It's never
Dance instructor.
Yeah, I couldn't. Now, Lala would have been happy with that. She would have been thrilled.
Yeah.
But, so, I mean, while I don't think that we were really what you'd call groomed, we were groomed. By everything that we did, we were sort of groomed. We knew the background. Maybe not the specifics of what they did and how they did it, but they kind of kept us involved in knowledge about it. And didn't push it so hard that we just decided we wanted to do something completely different.
Well, when you came back from college, what was your role on the ranch?
Actually, when I came back from college in '98, I was graduate school. Graduated from college in '96 and graduate school in '98. Really, I was kind of a man without a country. There was no real position for me. So I floundered around in the office for 6 or 9 months or something like that, maybe a year. I don't really remember. And finally, I got tired of that. So I quit the office and just moved out to the feed yard. And at the time, we had 3 feed yards. We sold one a few years ago. So we had one here in Guymon, which is just on top of the hill. We had one by Optimal, which is about 20 miles from here. And then we had another one in Kansas, kind of near Garden City, Kansas. And the first, I went to Henry's Feed, which is on top of the hill, and just started driving a feed truck. And I kind of went through the rotation on, I said there's 3 different departments at the feed yard, your cattle, your maintenance, and your feed department. And I went through all 3 departments and worked at the various tasks. The only thing I did not delegate to myself was cowboying. And once again, while I can ride a horse and rope a little, I'm not a full-time cowboy. I really wouldn't have been a particularly good asset to the cowboy crew. And it's not something that you just walk out there and pick up and start doing. But I did pretty much every other job on the yard besides weld, because once again, I don't know how to weld very well. I can weld a little bit. I can usually burn myself and catch things on fire, but the metal doesn't stick together. But I did that at all 3 yards. And while all 3 yards are exactly the same, they're all different. I mean, all of them have little perks and traits and characteristics that we use the same. We have the same nutritionist, the same vet, the same feed trucks, the same feed programs. But if you don't know, you can have 2 sisters that are identical twins and not even remotely alike personality-wise. And that's kind of the way our feed yards were. At the time, I called them the good, the bad, the ugly, and I won't tell you which feed yards I assigned the names to, but it had more to do with how well the employees themselves worked within the various departments. You can have 3 very distinct departments that hate one another, or you can have 3 departments that really you couldn't tell the difference in any of them. They're all but like best friends. And that was educational. I don't know how many, probably 2, 2.5, maybe 3 years I did that. When I got back from that and kind of moved back into the office, they gave me a title, and there really wasn't anything to do. It was just sort of, it's hard to take a company that's fully employed and then stick a person in and say, all right, here you go. So I sort of started going to a lot of conventions and trade shows, and kind of recruiting customers. Not full time, but that's sort of how I had to kill some time and do something. And there was really, I didn't have any, it's not like I got to the office at 8 and had this list of chores to do in the morning. I'm not an accountant, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't have any of the, my dad was doing all the trading, I couldn't do any of that. So I ended up just sort of kind of making it up as I went. A lot of the time was spent, like I said, at trade shows, but a lot of the education side of it really was board meetings I knew now the physical tasks you had to do when you received an animal all the way through the other end when you shoved him back out the door and he would end up on somebody's table to eat. But I didn't know how anything else went to work up at the office. So buying corn for the cattle, contracting on the cattle, all that other stuff that you had to do in order to make the business run, 401k, health plans. Now as CEO of the company, I spend almost no time looking at anything that's not straight generic business-oriented material, with the exception of commodity trading. I love to trade commodities. I do not do it by myself. Anybody else up there can do it as well or probably better, but I do enjoy it a lot. But, most of my conversations have to do with employee relations, workers' comp, injury stuff, just you name it. It's the business side of it now. It's like Rick said, you can hire somebody to do the manual labor, and that's not where money's made and lost. The money's made and lost up there at the office. You can make more money or lose more money in a few days at the commodity board than you can do as a feedlot manager in a year. And that's really the way the business has evolved. With my brother, we have 2 feed yards, and we have a farrow-to-finish operation with about 15,000 head of sows that produce approximately 300,000 head of pigs. We're growing our hog operation. We'll put in around 50,000 more head finished capacity. So we'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 350,000 head by the end of the year. We actually leased the barns to Seaboard for a number of years, and we just got it back. So we're kind of growing on that side. Whereas the cattle side is really shrinking. That's a result of several different factors. The biggest one being drought. The last few years have killed off tens of millions of cows. The drought, you can't have a cow if there's nothing to eat. And so those cattle went to the packing facility. And if you kill a cow, it can't have a calf next spring. So the number of calves being born each year has gotten smaller for really, by and large, since I got back in '98. It's just it'll have its peaks and valleys, but it's pretty much dropped steadily. We kind of had a reasonably dry period from '98 on. So it's been a lot of factors. There's also the generic cyclical nature of the commodity business. You'll have good years, bad years. Good years, people say, hey, I need to have more cows. I'm going to save a few of these heifers. Bad years, they say, I don't want to own any of them. I'm going to sell everything. In the bad years, there's lots of cattle to feed. The good years, there's not as many. So we have been basically reacting to what the market's given us, and we're shrinking down our feedlot size. We sold one feed yard, like I said, a few years ago. The feed yards now are not full, don't look to be full for quite a while. And so we still are really bullish on the ag industry, beef production specifically, hogs as well, long term. But this is a pretty tough time period for the cattle industry. Basically, my brother and I have decided whenever my dad died, Dad didn't say, you're president, you're not president, or anything like that. He just keeled over. So we kind of kicked around for a little while, and what we decided to do is kind of have a dual management team. We went and looked at the articles of incorporation on the company, and it required that there be a CEO and a chairman of the board. President. A president and a chairman of the board. But it didn't say how many CEOs you had. So technically, I'm president and CEO, and Jason is chairman of the board and CEO. Additionally, we have our head accountant, CFO, is kind of assumed the role. I'm 41, he's 42, my brother's 43, so we've got a really young management team, which is good and bad. The CFO runs the day-to-day operations of the company. Jason and I I've tended to focus, much like my grandfather, spend a lot of time outside the company, politicking, doing the best we can to fight anybody that's against ag. You've got HSUS, PETA, you've got EPA, you've got various different people nipping at you all the time, and we're trying to try to defend it. The nice thing about having two people, we got a little butterfly flying over here. The nice thing about having two CEOs is we kind of bounce things off one another, and I can always, if you come in and ask me a question, I can always put you off for a day or two until my brother gets around. The other side of it is, if you do have to have an answer right now, usually one of us is in the office and we can talk about it. At first, we didn't know if that was going to work. It's had its ups and downs, but by and large, it's worked pretty well. And really, there's enough work to go around. We don't need to be hogging it. We can share it out pretty well. And it's been an interesting ride. It's been difficult. My dad certainly had the benefit of his father being around for a lot longer than I did. In an industry that's dominated by 60 and 70-year-old men, we are decades younger than our contemporaries. As I said, my cousin over here, he's now kind of with the company and working freelancing for us. I have another cousin that moved back. In fact, he approached me at my father's funeral. He grew up in the cattle industry. His father was in feed yards. He moved away and was a teacher for several years, graduated from Oklahoma State. Got tired of the teaching deal, teaching 8th grade and 9th grade, I think, and decided he wanted to get back in the cattle business. He's running our feed yard up on top of the hill. Like I said, we've got Rick and his family that have been with us forever. We've got a number of 40-year employees that either are just about to retire or have just retired. We've got a pretty big brain drain that's happening to our company. I don't think we're unusual. It's just one of the things we've had for a company that's had anywhere from 250 to 350 employees for the last 20 years. Losing, a dozen or 10 40-year employees over the course of 5 or so years is a lot of loss. They know we're water lines that were put in the ground whenever I was a toddler. It's tough to replace them, and it's certainly tough to replace them with people of their same caliber. A lot of times, you can't identify that person until he's worked for you for a long time, 20 years. Well, they lived in an era where you got a job at 22 and you quit the job at 65. And then you didn't change jobs 3 or 4 times. Well, now kids, they stay at a job 7 or 8 years, or it means they change jobs 7 or 8 times, I think is what they say. From the time that you graduate school and start your career, you'll work for 7 or 8 different companies. Well, kind of tough to identify and hold on to talent whenever there's turnover like that, as well as the fact that we live in Guymon and it's hard to get talent recruited here anyway. As far as the cattle and the hogs go, we really don't do things a whole lot differently. At least the hogs, we just started the hogs. Relatively new business for us. It is by far and away now our largest. There's nothing that's even close to it. Would have been pretty 50-50 with cattle, and it's just cattle have just shrunk and the hogs have expanded. We still use the commodity board. It's the lifeblood of the company. We have to use it. The bankers, when we started out, fat cattle were costing $58. Fat. 1,200-pound animal, 58 cents a pound. They're 162 cents a pound. Hogs were 8 cents. They are 95 to 100. So things monetarily, capital that you need to have to put 100,000 head of cattle on feed, you only need $105 million. That's a pretty dang big note. I mean, that's a lot of money. It was 25% of that. Whenever I came back.
People don't understand it. I mean, you see a semi-load of cattle going down the highway, you could say that that's at least $100,000 and maybe $130,000 worth of freight right there. Every truck. I don't care if they're 400 pounders or 1200.
They're 400 pounders. They can stick more heading.
They just stick more in them. So they cost less, but they're still the same dollar figure of money in that truck. It's crazy. The volume of money that you have to spend for the opportunity to make as little as you can make. Feeder cattle today, weighing 8-way cattle, will cost you around $1,700 a head. First cost. That's just delivered to your place. And you have to process them, deliver them, feed them. Some of them are going to die, and then sell them. And hopefully you can make, if you could hedge every calf that you got for $30, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? Really?
Heck, I'd be growing up there.
See, but, and so you're going to invest 20, 23, 24, $2,500 to make 30. It's not very good investment.
Yeah.
You know, that's kind of the deal we're in.
The farmers and ranchers of the world are the most optimistic people on the face of the earth. It doesn't rain, it doesn't rain, it doesn't rain, it doesn't rain. I mean, we're in the 30s when the Dust Bowl. We're right in the center of it. We're still here. There's no way that you're not an optimist if you made it through the Dust Bowl and you're still doing, your grandchildren are still doing the same thing. The days the sun's going to shine, hopefully the cloud up and rain a little bit, but that's the mentality that we have, and it's going to get better. Even if it's great right now, it's going to get better, or maybe it's not going to get worse. I don't know. But if you're not committed to it emotionally and mentally, you don't need to be in the business. There's not very many people that are going to get rich in the cattle and hogs. They kind of, the media portrays it as all these fat cats living off the largesse of the people. But if you look at those deals, they're ranches like this that have been in business for 130 years. The King Ranch in Texas was a 1,500 section. It's been in place for over, I think it was in the 1850s. I mean, yeah, there's some wealthy people in it, but by and large,
with the oil and gas that made it.
Well, yeah. By and large, though, it's multi-generational entities that have lasted and been lucky enough. There's been some strategic planning on all of them, but a lot of it's still luck. I mean, if you're the guy that made it through the Dust Bowl, it was because you got a better banker, you got a little lucky. But they were able to absorb the guy next to them and grow and grow and grow.
The ag industry, to me, is you don't see. There's very few people. I can only name one or two. Mike Smith being one that has actually got into the business and just multiplied, and now he owns 2 feedlots or 3 feedlots, 4 or 5 ranches, and come from nothing. I mean, most people that you see in the business today inherited a base. All of these people that's around here, they all had money. They all got a very good start. It's not like, well, I'm just going to buy me 2 pens of cattle, and then I'm going to snowball that and just keep on going, and then I'm going to buy me some land, and then I'm going to buy a feedlot, and I mean, your return on your investment is pretty hard to do unless you're in computing.
Yeah,
Ted Turner, you look at those guys now, that's a different deal. And Chris was saying that the guy that's 17 years old, he didn't graduate from high school, look at Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
You don't really need to graduate.
It is definitely a lifestyle decision.
Has the wind power had a role on your farm?
Yeah.
We have it. We have some generation units. Okay, the ranch is not quite as simple as mine. My brother and I are 100% stockholders of Hitch Enterprises. That's 100% out. Much of the land here actually belongs to a trust that my great-grandfather, all right, he had the foresight and kind of the curse, if you will. He saw a lot of these ranches being torn apart by their children. Whenever the father would die, the children would squabble over it, sell it off, break it up to where one person couldn't make a living, so they just sold the whole thing. He didn't want that to happen. So what he did was he formed this complicated generation skipping trust that Josh and I, my cousin, we're all beneficiaries of it. We're not trustees. We're just beneficiaries. So what he did was he kept the land together. The problem is that Hitch Enterprises, that is kind of the extension of his old ranch, what's morphed into, doesn't own much of the property. It's owned by a trust. Many of the people whom are beneficiaries of the trust don't live here, don't come here, don't have anything to do with it. And while they've not been kind of greedy, give me a bunch of money type deal, it's still going to be a problem sometime down the road. It's sort of like, you're kicking the can further and further down the road. Eventually, it's going to come due, that note, and it's going to have some interest on it. And that's going to be a really interesting conversation at that time. And Josh knows what we're talking about. Josh just come out here from Bethesda. He's a perfect example. Came out from Bethesda, Maryland to here, thinking he would be here for 6 months max, filming stuff for us, taking pictures, and then quickly realized that 6 months was not even remotely enough time to get it all done. But had he not come out here and kind of found a connection with everything and understood what's going on and why we do the things that we do, what is it to him? What does he want? The most money he can get out of it. He's a beneficiary of the trust. Why would he want something else? It's not that he's evil or bad. It's just the nature of the situation. Well, so a bunch of the land that they're building these turbines on is not really my land. It's trust land. Some of it is actually Hitch Enterprises land, but most of it, I think, is trust land. Now, with regards to how much they pay us, if I understand this correctly, and I may not, those big turbines aren't quite what you'd call a real turnkey, uncomplicated contraption. When you build a farm of them, a multi-unit farm where there's 25 or 30 or 40 turbines, there's a whole bunch of weird electronic interferences that happen, and it can take years to get it all fine-tuned to where it's running well. Additionally, they're still on a market for electricity that fluctuates over time. There's a base in there. That base is something like, I don't even know, like 30,000 a turbine a year or some such enough. I don't know exactly. Then they have, that's the minimum that they'll pay you for the turbine. And then if they'll, or so many kilowatt hours that they sell, and you get a percentage of that, whichever's greater. So far, they haven't even come close to generating near what they would have to do to get off the base. Now, long term, is it a good deal? Yeah, absolutely. It's mailbox money. I don't have to hire anybody. I don't have to manage anyone. I don't have to do anything. And theoretically, I ought to receive a check every month. The royalties are much the same way. It's a way to increase income without increasing work.
What year did they start on the ranch?
They probably came out in the early 2000s. And there was a number of companies that were, I guess they could, so to speak, read the fortune and see that it was coming. The money was going to be there. The tax breaks and tax incentives were going to be there. And so they started laying down the groundwork. They knew that they needed to have some studies to prove that we had not only the volume of wind that they needed, but the type of wind. They want kind of between these parameters of this slow and this fast to blow at a relative rate of this fast for so long. They don't want 30 days of no wind and then 10 days of 200 mile an hour wind, for a horrible example, but to make a point. They'd rather have 50 days of 25-mile-an-hour winds every day. That's what they need to make it work, where it's a nice steady stream of wind they can sell. So they had to do studies. So they started coming out, leasing up options, buying options on the right to lease it later. If they could put up a tower to measure the wind, figure out where it's working, where it won't. And they're using the valley here that we're in, that the north side less so, but it's going to be developed probably eventually, but definitely the south side. And they're going to use that. They're using the valley floor and all that to generate more wind than it would otherwise. So I'm certainly not a climatologist or whatever it is, scientist that studies all that stuff, but yeah, it's been nice. I think that it's a prime example that you just really don't know what you've got. I mean, whenever I was here, there's no highline wires, there's no wind turbines, and you could park out here on the street and not see a truck go by for 2 hours or 3 hours whenever I was a kid. Now, the roads constantly got traffic on it. Whenever it gets dark, there's blinking lights everywhere across the horizon. And everybody was really against it right up until the time they started getting out the checkbooks and say, we're going to pay you for damages on your land of this, such. And, most of the time that like if they say 10 acres that they're going to damage while they're putting up a wind turbine, the land might only be worth $1,000 an acre, but they paid you $2,500 for the damage. These guys got their land paid for on those specific areas. So it's been good for the surface rights owners. Long term, I think it's going to be a good deal. We are actually in a massively energy we have tons of energy here. Wind, solar if you wanted to put it up, but nobody is because of the wind. I think that's a problem. But also we have lots of natural gas, a little bit of oil, not as much as the natural gas. We got plenty of power in the area, so we're shipping it out. We're thinking about taking some of the hard effluent cattle manure, you can digest it, make a natural gas, turn a generation unit. Before, we didn't have anywhere to go with the electricity. Now we have an outlet. I think Florida Power is the Florida Light and Power.
Florida Power and Light.
Is that what it is? They're the actual ultimate purchaser of it, and going all the way to Memphis is where it ties into where the system that is actually going to transport it out there. I'm sure you guys have
underground.
Heard. Huh?
Underground or house?
No.
No.
You don't put things like that underground.
Well,
They're too big, too much heat generated.
How's it going? We were curious.
They are. I mean, there are some down there, and I can take you down there here in a minute. We can take a quick look. But it's got to be huge power line, huge power line. And it's kind of they kind of backdoored into how they're getting across Oklahoma. What they figured out is that they really didn't want to try to fight every single landowner and argue and negotiate. They're going to, but they didn't. They wanted to have a stick to beat them up with. And the way they got the stick is eminent domain. Now, if they are not an electric provider for the state of Oklahoma for residents within the state of Oklahoma, you can't eminent domain. It has to be a service to the state of Oklahoma or to people of the state of Oklahoma. So what they did is they partnered with a local electrical cooperative, and I don't know where or which one it was. But now, this guy is actually serves the state of Oklahoma and employees. So now they can eminent domain you if they want to. Now, we all know that it's not the best thing to beat somebody up if you can feed them a steak and make them feel good about coming across the property. So they are doing much the same thing, $2,500 an acre in some places. I don't know what total numbers, but I mean, big money, more than the land's actually worth across the property. There will still be a few people that will say, I don't want it, not on me. And those guys, they'll say, you know what, we've got 600 miles of property here, and there's only 3 different little disruptions in it. We're going to use eminent domain across your property. We're going to pay you the same thing that we paid everybody else, but we're going to do it. Like I said, it's kind of sneaky. It's a backdoor way to get through it. But I don't even know when that project's going to be done. They've laid one line. I know it came from Woodward. I don't know where from Woodward it went. We did it. I mean, you can see it out if you're driving. It's on the south side of the road.
How'd you all come? Did you come up through Watonga?
We followed 412.
Yeah. It's on the south side of the road between here and or Woodward. You can look off and see it. It's like
It's on the right before you get into Watonga. It's on the north side of the road. It's the same power line. Runs all the way to Oklahoma City.
And
It costs like $1.3 million a month.
They got it. They finished it this past year. That's the first trunk line that they built. This other one is bigger, and it will service a lot more people. But that's the system out here. Everything that's built is going through the smaller one. When the bigger one gets built, there'll be a lot more wind turbines go up.
They have that booster station for them also.
Yeah.
And the booster, anything that's generated in Oklahoma goes to the Oklahoma booster. Anything that's generated in Texas goes to the Texas booster. There's 2 booster stations down there. One up there, they might be a half mile apart. One of them's in Texas, one of them's in Oklahoma.
There was a time whenever if the electricity generated in Oklahoma did not benefit in Oklahoma, you didn't get the tax incentive. So even though a lot of these wind turbines were actually in Oklahoma, they built the it's not a booster, it's like takes it from DC to AC or whatever to transport it. I don't understand electricity real well. I was a businessman, I don't know.
Conditioner.
But yeah, it makes the electricity where you can ship it. And it's right on the Texas line in Texas. Because Texas doesn't care where it's generated. It's put up and taken a hold of in Texas and then sent. So they had the tax incentive. So all this money started flowing out into Texas. And that's whenever they figured it out that, where you go. Oh, by the way, if you're going to work on them, where are you going to work? In Oklahoma with income tax? Or are you going to move right down there into Texas and work where you have no state income tax?
And a lot of them, all the first ones that was put in, there's all in Texas. People would argue with me, say, well, some of those, I said, they're not in Oklahoma.
You go to the line and
Go to the line, look. They're not very far in Texas, but they're in Texas.
But all this whole south rim and a bunch of the north, my brother, he's got the map. They figured out this little area over here is not that good for whatever reason. I don't know why. But this area over here on the north side is much better, and it's going to be developed fine. But it still might be 10, 12 years before it gets developed because they've got to get the lines in.
Then you mean to when pigs fly. You got winds and pigs. I shouldn't say that.
Yeah, well, hopefully it'll stop being as windy around here. If they get enough of them up, maybe it'll slow stuff down, right? It'd be like having these trees where, you can hear the wind blowing, but it's not that
How come
bad.
there's only 8 windmills over there? I said, that's all they can put up. I said, the wind comes up there and hits the 8 mills, stop. He said, you go on down the road and walk? No, it doesn't. I said, okay.
Well, as we start to wind down, tell me a little bit about your mother.
Mom, she lived right there in the big house. She said that's the original house. It burned down in the early 90s and they rebuilt it. And she was a teacher pre-babies, and then she was a housewife, and now she's a doting grandmother. I have 2 kids, and she's been, well, more than sometimes I think my wife wants her down there. She wants to come down and hold babies and hang out. But really, she's, just a widow. And she's 71, and at this point, she kind of had some surgeries and stuff. Doesn't get around as well as she used to get around. So her days are spent hanging out at the ranch with babies as much as possible. Never did work for the company. No background in her. Her father was a career accountant for Phillips in Arkansas.
Did it take much to convince her to move to Guymon from Bartlesville?
She's also cut from that same role where, maybe talked back a little bit more and expressed an opinion than some of my grandmothers and stuff, but it definitely was, he's the guy making the money, he's the head of the household, and that's where I'm going to go. I don't think there was a lot of negotiation off of it. Of course, if you met me with my dad, it wasn't like it was a surprise that whenever we graduated, we were going back to Guymon. So if you wanted to be grumpy about it, it's your own fault. I mean, everybody knew it, to where we were going, what we were doing.
So your ranch was one of the first in '89 to be given the designation from Governor Billman. As we look towards the next 100 years, what do you hope will happen to the land and the ranch?
Well, it'd be nice to find out that yucca is worth $1,000 a pound. I really do. These bugs will quit. I really believe that cattle, very specifically cattle, but also hogs to a lesser degree. There's a lot of opportunity there worldwide. Used to the cattle and hogs and pretty much all proteins. Where they were grown is where they were consumed. If they were grown in the United States, they were consumed in the United States. Maybe a little bit in Canada, a little bit in Mexico, and they'd cross the border pretty freely with meat and animals. That's just not the case. Whereas there's cattle all over the world, and there's people that eat cattle all over the world. All the cattle all over the world are not the same cattle. There are different breeds, and there are different environments that the cattle makes a different type of meat quality-wise. The United States is one of, if not the only place in the world that can produce the type of high-quality meat that we produce. We have ports that can send to Asia or to Europe and Africa. We have a massive quality infrastructure for interstate commerce, shipping needs. We have first world technology. The downside is we have first world expenses as well for our employees and everything else. But there's a lot of people in China. And it doesn't take a lot of Chinese people eating American beef to go through a lot of beef. There's 300 million people in the United States. There's over, there's like 1.2 billion in China. I don't have to sell a steak to every Chinaman. I only got to sell one to 1 in 10. So, to me, as the underdeveloped nations of the world grow and get larger middle classes, if all you've done all your life is eat white rice, pretty much anything sounds better than white rice. And, a lot of people would like to have a big fat juicy steak or a piece of pork if they're not Muslim. And I think that's where the growth in the industry is going to come. It's not going to come from the United States. We're rich, we're fat. We complain about the beef that's grown here. Really, the people that don't have anything or have never had anything until now, they're the ones that are really going to pick up the slack as far as our industry. Now, that being said, we have a lot of wolves nipping at our heels here in the United States. Like I said, there's a lot of people that don't like ag here. They don't like, they want everybody to go vegan. They don't like the environmental impacts that ag has. They don't like, really, they just don't like it. They think that if they get rid of it here or they regulate it, it'll become better. What they don't understand is what they're going to do is they're going to outsource the industry to someplace else where there's less regulation. Russia's got a lot of property over there in the Mediterranean area that's very fertile, it's very underdeveloped. And if I spoke Russian, there was a Russian girl in my graduate school class. I probably should have married her. I'd probably be a billionaire right now. But there's some opportunities out there. It's underdeveloped. It doesn't have the interstate system. It doesn't have the shipping lanes that we have. But they have the ground, the people. They don't know anything about the business. But we deal with that here. You could see it get moved. I promise you, there's no EPA over in Kazakhstan telling those people, don't grow food. Or if you're going to grow it, here's how you're going to do it. They're willing to take anything they can get their hands on technology-wise.
All of that comes from people having enough money that they don't have to worry about eating.
Yeah.
If you had to worry about how you was going to survive, you would not be very concerned about, or near as concerned about the environment as you are. I guarantee you. Like all the rich people that are in Hollywood, once they make their fortune, well, then we go save the whales. We go do other things instead of worrying about working. I mean, we don't have to work. We've got money. So I can do things now that I couldn't even, go to the ghettos and ask some people up there, you worry about saving the whales, or you worry about, no, they worry about eating.
Yeah, to answer your question, that kind of just, I mean, if we can hold on, get some common sense to regulation, which is probably right now, that scares me more than anything, is regulation. And when I say regulation, it's not from people that, in my mind, are common sense, that just want to make sure that we're doing what we say we want to do. It's people that get into, it's the animal rights activists that get involved with the USDA, who are now going to inspect your feed yard. Well, you know what? They have a standard that you're never going to make because they don't want you to be in business in the first place. That's the same thing with in the EPA side. They'll promulgate a rule that is unattainable in any form or fashion out here. They'll pass a dust regulation that out here, if you drive a pickup truck down the dirt road, you violated that rule on particulate matter levels. So, I mean, that's where I'm most concerned. There's demand for our product, even at these ridiculously high prices we have right now. There's people that are willing to pay for it and buy it up, but we can't sell it to them if we're not allowed to operate in the future. And that's where I am. That's where I'm worried about is, can we continue to do that? It'll change. I mean, will we have feedlots? I don't know. It's getting drier out here. Probably not going to be able to grow corn in the volume that we were in the past. We do have a rail system and a trucking system that's pretty good, but will the feeding migrate away from here? It takes a lot of money to move a plant in liberal Kansas that's worth $450 million. It's pretty hard to uproot that. They'll truck cattle in.
They have a work base.
Yeah, I mean, so I don't know. It won't be an overnight thing. It'll be a gradual thing. But yeah, I could see in 25 or 30 years where we're back to cattle in a pasture out here and some hogs, and not have the numbers of feedlot animals that we have. The hogs, I think, are here for a while. They take less space, take less water. They don't eat as much, so you can fit them in a smaller area and
Controlled environment.
Yeah, it's a controlled environment. It's easier to make money in the hog business than it is in the cattle business. More of your beginning costs, or more of your costs from beginning to end, you can predict them a lot more reliably. And if you can predict what your costs are going to be, you can more accurately reflect what your bottom line needs to be out here when you sell an animal. Cattle, it's not like that. It's kind of at the whim of the market.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we round out? We appreciate your time today. Yeah, final go post. There we go. Thank you, Chris and Rick, so much. We appreciate it.